Vive la liberté! Bastille Day, today, July 14th. That's the day the French mark as their Independence Day, their equivalent of July 4th. And I thought we'd chat a little bit today about the differences between the French Revolution and the American Revolution and why they produce such different outcomes in the countries. A lot of this is from a book by Susan Dunn called Sister Revolutions that was written about 4 or 5 years ago, and it's a really good book. Basically, the best way to approach it is what Gouverneur Morris said. He was the American ambassador to France during the time of the French Revolution. And he said, Americans prefer light, French prefer lightning. And what he meant by that was that the French loved the spectacle, the riots in the streets, the demonstrations, the huge overturning, all of the lightning and the flashing and all of that. Whereas Americans are much more steadier lot, and they prefer an orderly transition of government. And those styles were heavily reflected in their revolutions. Indeed, the concept behind the revolutions was totally different. The American concept stemmed from Madison, the idea of checks and balances, the idea of limiting the power of government. After all, the colonies rebelled because they didn't want to be taxed by the British without representation in Parliament. And they wanted to limit the power of government, and Madison set up a system of checks and balances, basically of not letting anyone run too far without running into a Supreme Court or the other House of Congress or a presidential veto or all of the checks that we've set up on excessive power in the United States government. The French Revolution stemmed more from Rousseau's theory of the general will and the social contract, the idea that in a state of nature, man and God made a social contract in which the men could control their own lives through liberty to achieve social justice and express the general will. The idea that the world had one will, one view, which needed to be expressed, which tyrants and dictators and in some cases church leaders were trying to undermine, and that you needed to throw these off and to have the general will be recognized. So the French government was not set up with checks and balances. It was not set up to limit government authority. It was set up with precisely the intent of enabling government power to bring about a social revolution. And whereas the American Revolution narrowly concerned issues of nationhood, democracy, taxation, and power, the French Revolution dealt primarily with limiting the power of the church on the one hand and dethroning the nobility and the monarchy on the other hand. At the time in France, there were 3 estates. The first estate was the clergy, the second was the nobility, and the third was everybody else. And they basically wanted to get rid of the first 2 estates and just have everybody else run the country. That led to an integration of the notion of liberty with the notion of social equality. It made the French Revolution really about giving those who had no wealth and had no property the right to education, to decent food, to clothing, to shelter, to all of that stuff. And as such, it laid the basis for European socialism. Liberté, égalité, fraternité basically means freedom, that we share in common, equality, which we came to after our Civil War, but fraternity, which basically means, in their take on it, social justice, income redistribution, leveling, concepts that are not only not in our revolution, but antithetical to it. And if you go back to those roots, those different cores to our revolutionary experiences, you begin to see how alien Barack Obama is to our American revolutionary tradition and how much he falls in line with the European, even to the extent of bypassing the Madisonian checks and balances, not asking for confirmation on his czars, ordering cuts in our nuclear arsenal without consulting with Congress, passing by executive order the labor changes and the regulatory changes on the environment that liberals want, that Congress specifically refused to pass, all of that, and then passing a health care law that it was justified on an unconstitutional basis until Roberts hunted long enough to come up with the justification. But that's because Obama doesn't follow the checks and balances. That's not his revolutionary heritage. His heritage is much more akin to the European one, of the general will and what they would consider, in their phrase, social justice. So I thought it would be an interesting perspective to look at it from that way. Thanks a lot for watching. Have a nice weekend.